Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and you're very welcome to the Centre Culturel Irlandais and to this evening's conversation between two legends from the Irish theatre world. It is a great honour to have you both here this evening, and Lynne is just coming towards the end of her 2-month residency in the Centre Culturel Irlandais. I hope it's been a fruitful time for you. We'll hear about it. We'll obviously hear about Rough Magic, one of Ireland's finest theatre companies, which Lynne co-founded some 35 years ago. And it's wonderful also to welcome back Eleanor Methven, who was with us last summer for a month and will come back then in 2020. So I'm going to hand over to Eleanor, who will be in conversation with Lynne Parker.
Thanks, Nora. Yeah, welcome everybody. Great to see you here. I'm delighted to be here to talk to my friend and colleague many times, Lynne Parker. As Nora said, Lynne is artistic director of one of our finest independent theatre companies in Ireland, if not the finest, in my opinion. She has worked with many other companies. She's worked with the Abbey Theatre Dublin, with the Royal Shakespeare Company, the Peter Hall Company, the Traverse in Scotland, but she is mainly, of course, known as artistic director of Rough Magic Theatre Company, and that started a long time ago. You were a callow youth. You came down from Belfast to do English at Trinity College, and you've often said yourself that you ended up doing players instead. Talk to us about players a bit.
Well, yes, I came to do English literature at Trinity. The main reason for going to Trinity was that it had a very excellent and well thought of drama society. Players Theatre at Trinity College in number 3 Front Square in those days was a great seedbed of professional work. And in those days, there was no drama training of any kind. There wasn't a drama degree. And now we have the wonderful Samuel Beckett Centre at Trinity. And many fine people have come through that, but it didn't exist when I was there. So I did English in theory, but I sort of skimmed through it on my A-level course from Belfast. But mainly what I was doing was spending all waking hours in Players Theatre learning how to put on plays. And I maintain that it was a pretty good training because there wasn't actually anyone to tell you how to do it. You had to find out yourself. And you had the luxury of being able to make a complete idiot of yourself without it costing you your career. So this is how we all started. And when I was there were a number of very wonderful people, so many of whom have gone into the theatre industry. People like Pauline McLean, like Stanley Townsend, Arthur Reardon, Helen Montague, who started with us. And we all felt that we wanted to keep on doing this after we'd left college. And in the summer of 1984, a bunch of us set up this company as a summer company. A lot of people did that, and you were able to do it, partly because of the location of the theatre. It was just beside the main gateway into Trinity. So what we did was we had lunchtime shows, which we ran twice a day at lunchtime, and we were able to poach the tourists, mainly American tourists in those days, and drag them into the theatre and make them watch our shows and sell them our absolutely appalling lunch. And they seemed all quite pleased to do that. But with that, we were able to make just about enough money to do the more adventurous work in the evenings. So we were, in those days, premiering work that was extremely high profile elsewhere, but which no one in Ireland was looking at that time. People like Carol Churchill, like David Mamet, Wallace Shawn, Howard Brenton, Timberlake, Wertenbaker, major writers. And that's how we cut our teeth. And how we got noticed, because as I say, Ireland at that point was relatively inward-looking. There was, and where it was looking to the European work, it was looking to classics, to the older work. The Abbey was doing stuff that was pretty much set in the 1950s in Ireland. So we felt that we were part of a generation and a culture which was hugely influenced by American movies and British television and all the new work that was coming through those media of that time. So we felt ourselves part of a global culture, and that our generation should be making its own statement and its own and talking to the younger audience members who were coming through. So within about 6 months of our foundation, we moved to the main experimental space in Dublin, which was Project Art Centre, which is still very much where we have done so much of our work. And we continued to do international work. And then we moved into classics, to reinterpretations of classics. And I'm going to run through some of the photographs that I've got with me, and they're a very desultory bunch of images. When I was getting them together at the very last minute, I was bringing them in kind of bunches of photographs. So they're not necessarily in chronological order, but I will just talk a little bit about them as I go. And then just to complete that bit of the company's history, once we had worked in international and classic work, we realised it was time to start commissioning and producing new Irish writing, and that was the next big important stage. So I'll just run through some of these images. Okay?
So this is like your your desert island discs. This is Lynne's first choice. Lynne, tell us about your first choice.
Well, it's like desert island discs if the person chooses only their own work, which is not done, I believe. This is a play. This is a musical, in fact. This is Improbable Frequency, which was written by Arthur Reardon and a musical combo called Bell Helicopter. And Arthur came to me with the idea of writing a musical about crosswords, and I said, really? And but he came up with this fantastical idea, which was that during the emergency, as it was called in Ireland, otherwise known as the Second World War, a young cryptographer was sent to Ireland to find out about some messages that the British believed were being passed between Nazi Germany and the IRA, who had some collusion during that time. During that period, the physicist Erwin Schrödinger was actually resident in Dublin. This is true, and so was John Betjeman, the poet. And also hanging around the place was Flann O'Brien, or Miles Nagopaline, which was his newspaper name. And Arthur whipped up this fantastical idea that the three of these guys were collaborating on a secret machine, which was it was called PAT, or the Probability Adjustment Tank. And its purpose was to send out waves of improbability that would actually change the course of the war and end the Second World War. Nobody realizes this at first, so there are all sorts of blind alleys and red herrings. And all of this is done to music, because Arthur is an incredible musician. So it's all in rhyme, and it's all to music, and it's completely unique. And it ends up with them discovering that the PAT machine has been malfunctioning, making Dublin the most improbable city on the earth, which in many ways it still is. So there is a sense of absurdism that runs through all of this work, and this is something that's really key to Rough Magic and its story. A sense of humour is something that's always characterised what we do, and also a sense of ensemble. So I'll show you a few more of these images.
Well, can I just say, though, that this is one of the most joyous nights I've ever spent in a theatre as an audience member, it really was magnificent. It won Best Production in 2004. It also won Best Director for Lynne in 2004. I'm never sure why Best Production is different from Best Director, because I do feel that they're very close run thing, but it really is excellent. Arthur has a great sense of joy, and Rough Magic is known for that, and Lynne's rehearsal room is very much known for a sense of play. It's very serious play. So that's Improbable Frequency, and a very good choice, ma'am. What's next?
Okay, so this is a more recent image. This is from a Midsummer Night's Dream, which we did last year. And in fact, right. That's from A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which is our adaptation of Joyce, which was also done by Arthur. Midsummer Night's Dream. Midsummer Night's Dream. Mm-hmm. Bottom emerges from the.
And that was open air.
That's the moon. That is, yeah. This was done in the open air in Kilkenny Castle Yard last year. We'd never done open air Shakespeare before, but I have to say it's the best fun there is. Quite nerve-wracking, and you really only get to make the show in the very last moments, almost before the audience come in. But it's tremendous fun. We had a ball. Yes, that's from Improbable Frequency as well. And you see the shamrock swastikas, which was a kind of notional Ireland having been taken over by the forces of fascism, which were actually running around Ireland, as many other places at the time. Mm-hmm. But the designer, Alan Farquharson, is also a very funny man and a great wit. And he came up with that idea. And there were... These were on kabuki drops, so they sort of suddenly appeared in the middle of a song, and everybody just broke up laughing. This is from Peer Gynt, and this is also from Peer Gynt, also an Arthur Riordan adaptation of Ibsen's great work. That's Rory Nolan, and the two people, missed it, anyway. We'll come back to that, but Peer Gynt was the idea behind it was that you divided up the head of the lead character. Oh God, this is running. I can't do this and talk at the same time. Again, Peer Gynt was set to music, and a wonderful ensemble called Tarab, who actually I came across partly through Nora, who had them as resident artists at the Mermaid in Bray. They did the music for us because what they are is a sort of collective who have roots in North African, Mediterranean and Irish traditional music. So that's what we wanted to combine in Peer Gynt, because the whole thing is about an odyssey, and it goes all over the world and through the imaginative landscape of this character. So we're really interested in bringing together different elements where pluralism is a very big part of what we do. This is an image from Don Carlos, Schiller's Don Carlos, which was one of our most successful shows. Eleanor was in it. This is Nick Dunning playing King Phillip. And that was a show which was hugely successful, but partly because we did it in a very confined space. We couldn't run it for very long because it was extremely expensive and you couldn't get enough audience in to really pay for it. But it is one of the highlights of, I suppose, of our trajectory. And it was the intensity of the space in project, which is why space matters. And the audience feeling that they were right in on top of the action. But one of the clever tricks was, again, a designer, Paul O'Mahony, who did this very smart thing. So you have a very small confined space, but you've quite a high ceiling, and right at the top of the theatre, he put this little light box, which was like a window. So you felt that you were at the bottom of a mine shaft, and it really upped the ante in terms of tension. You just felt the outside world was somewhere up there, but you weren't getting anywhere near it, and you couldn't see the daylight. You could just see it coming in. So this is where design just hugely matters in how you tell a story.
It's one of my regrets is that because I was in that show, I couldn't actually see it. It was hugely successful, and as Lynn said, with the design, it had soft curtains all around. We tended to enter as actors from behind these curtains, and you knew things were going really, really well when you're standing behind one night waiting to come on, and the Queen was saying to Phillip, "Did you do this, my lord? Did you send this letter?" And there's a pause, and an audience member went, "Yes, he did." Which is just fantastic, because you're just so engrossed with the whole thing. It's just one of those really happy things where everything comes together. Fabulous script, really good cast, and a great design, really great design.
It's one of those times where, you know, people complain about people's attention span these days. Well, Don Carlos was 3.75 hours long, and nobody complained. Everybody was with it, because it's just such a great story. That's Gina Moxley. She's been here quite a lot, because Gina Moxley is a writer and a performer of the highest calibre, and her recent show is now going to the Edinburgh Festival and all that. But she was really part of the Rough Magic ensemble in the early 90s. And the play she is doing is called Digging for Fire. When I started Rough Magic with Declan Hughes, we'd been in college together. So we kind of were the joint artistic directors for the first while. And I knew in my bones that Declan was a writer. So I nagged him until he wrote something. And this is actually his second play. And it was a real milestone for the company, because nobody in Ireland takes you seriously until you've gone to usually the UK or elsewhere. So this was a really successful show, and one of the reasons was that it was really speaking to the generation that it was made by. So a lot of people said it was formative for them, because they hadn't come to see themselves on stage and their own generation, their own concerns. So it was hugely successful in Dublin, but it was also then taken to the Bush Theatre in London, where it won the Time Out Award that year and so forth. And it was really, you know, a seminal moment for us. And then it has been done all over the world, actually. And we actually revived it a few years ago, because it still has something to say. It's about friendship, and it's about the sense of Irishness that can be bogus when it's made into some kind of, you know, cozy notional identity. And it challenges all of that, and those things are still very pertinent now. But after we had been feted in London, our stock rose considerably. So, you know, you get taken a lot more seriously. And we did many new plays after that, one of which was Gina's play, Dante Dan. And it's interesting that in that cast, Gina Moxley, Pom Boyd, and Arthur Reardon were actually actors, and all of them went on to write plays for the company. Pom and Gina both we commissioned, and then Arthur is still writing for us. So the act of writing, which is such a very particular thing when you're a novelist or a poet, we feel comes very naturally to people who are coming from other branches of the theatre. So, and not that there is a hard and fast rule about that. I mean, of course, writers don't have to be directors or actors or whatever, but it seemed that there was a really good training, having been through the process of making work. And they were very aware of the effect of what they were doing on an audience, which is what it's all about. So, where are we? Oh, this is an interesting image, because it's from Congreve's Way of the World, which is written around 1700. And normally, I've gone. Sorry.
Never mind. Keep going. Go on.
Okay. That's also from the Way of the World.
Yeah.
And I'll just explain. Normally, of course, this would be done in 18th century costume with wigs and what have you. And I really wanted to draw people's attention to the modernity of the plot. It's a very complicated plot, and it's all about skullduggery, and everybody is up to no good. Absolutely everybody. And we found that the more you burrowed into the venal darkness of human nature, the better the play was, and the more it opened up. But to me, Congreve, who grew up in Ireland, he was English, but he grew up in Ireland. He's part of a great tradition of Irish writers that sort of goes through Wilde and Shaw and Boucicault and people like that, and ends up in a way with Noel Coward, hence this setting. And it's the comedy of manners. It's the way of using language in a very darkly satirical way, which I find extraordinarily accurate to human nature. I think that those plays really get what people are really like, and it's not pretty, but it's very stylish. So these two guys, they're two of the smaller characters, but I just love the shot because they're both caught completely absorbed in the moment and in character, and they're both absolute drunks. But the photograph that we just skipped by was Andrea Revine, who was playing Millamant, the lead, and she's a stunning actress, and she's very good at playing the apparent innocence of a very dark heart, and she was really funny.
And of course, that's Dara Kelly on the left, who was one of your...
That is indeed Dara Kelly, who was one of our founder members and who's still been working with us. Back to that one. So, I probably have gone through most of them now, haven't I? That's lovely, Martha. Martha, incidentally, that's actually Stephen Dedalus. So the production. This is Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. So this was directed by Ronan Phelan, our associate director, and he was very keen to take a very modern approach to this. Obviously we all know Joyce and we all know he left in 1904 and all of that, but Ronan said, I don't want this to be about granddad shirts. That was the first thing he said. And so he didn't want any sense of nostalgia or bicycles or, so he used a very modern soundtrack, Chaka Khan, whatever, and
young people's music.
That's my music, that's not young people's
music. Why
are
you forgetting it?
So given that we are all examining gender fluidity and gender in general, his final act was to portray Stephen, because the actors all played Stephen at one point or another. So the part was handed over. So sometimes people were Joyce the narrator, sometimes they were Stephen the character. And it ended up with Martha playing Stephen Dedalus as she makes the decision to leave Ireland and find her destiny, which is something that Irish people are still having to do, and many of them land up here. Yeah. That's just a Midsummer Night's Dream, so we just keep going. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I'll maybe pause it there because I think we've seen all the images now. I love that one. That's Karen McCartney as the moon in the Mechanicals play at the end.
And you both casts went through both Midsummer Night's Dream and the Joyce, the Portrait of the Artist. You used the same very young cast to go through both.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's crucial to the company as well, the ensemble idea, and we have had varying ensembles. As when we started, we were an ensemble of 7. That was 4 actors, 2 directors and a producer, and we did everything. And then as time went by, the actors would go off and do different things, and the actual core of the company contracted, but we then brought in new people. So the cast of Digging for Fire would have been very much regarded as the new Rough Magic ensemble, and that carried on for a bit. And then we would have done work in the 2000s, which would have had Don Carlos kind of ensemble. So and some of them you saw in Peer Gynt as well, and Improbable Frequency. So you get sort of regeneration of the group. And some people come back and in and out, and some people are new, and the new people are very, very important. But it's the sense of company and the sense of community that characterizes all of these things. I should talk a little bit about the other ensembles we have, which come to us through our development program, Seeds. And Seeds was something that we hit on in 2001, because we were looking at the Irish landscape and wondering how the theatre makers were going to get started, as we had done in the 80s, because the whole climate, the whole social and political climate and economic climate had changed so much. So we started this program called Seeds, and Seeds means seek out, encourage, enable, develop, and stage. And I'm delighted to say we have an ex-Seed in the audience this evening, Dara McKeown, who was one of the first directors on the program, and who's now a very successful novelist. So all sorts of writing can come out of these things. But Seeds became one of the, I suppose, the premier artist development program in Ireland. And now it began as a writers program. It expanded first to directors, and then it took in designers of all kinds: sound, lighting, set, costume, and directors, producers and production managers, because we believe the technical support that is given is not just technical. It has to have imagination and vision behind it, and the best people can make your work happen. And so we feel that's very much part of the creative family. So many ensemble have come through that program, and some of them have set up their own companies. For instance, there was a wonderful company called Wilfred, set up by Sarah Jane Shields and Sophie Motley, who were both on the Seeds program together, and they did remarkable work over a number of years, and are still working now independently. But the clusters of people have just proliferated, and the connection with the company is consistent, because, for instance, Ronan, who directed A Portrait of the Artist, was on the Seeds program 6 years ago, and we brought him into the company. And Zia, who's designing our next show, was a Seed, and we've had so many. Sarah Jane was and is designing with the company, and it just goes on and on and on. In fact, the guy who runs Project Arts Centre now, Cian O'Brien, was on the Seeds program. So it's a real motor for the regeneration, a replenishment, I suppose, of the theatre sector, and it's something that we have found incredibly valuable. And what we want to do is keep developing the program itself so it responds to the moment, rather than just saying that this is how you do it. So it itself, every iteration, and it's a 2-year engagement, every iteration is slightly different.
But just to clarify as well, though, when you get accepted onto the Seeds program, it's not a drama school. They're not starting off. These are people who have already begun in the business. Isn't that right?
Mostly people are just off the whatever training they've done. And the Lear Academy, which I've worked at now, is doing courses in a lot of these areas, but there is no substitute for doing it in the cold, chill light of the professional world, the real world. So whatever you learnt in the classroom, you now have to apply to real life, and this is where we make a difference. That's the bridge between the undergraduate and professional practice.
So what actually happens to a Seed? What do you do for a Seed?
We and again, it's grown over the years, but what happens now is you get a desk in Rough Magic. We have this very creaky old Victorian building in the middle of the town, which is a great location, and we have the use of 3 floors, but other companies share it with us. But the Seeds, each Seed will get a desk space there. So they've got a base in the city centre, which is really invaluable. They then intersect with the company wherever possible, and so they will assist on Rough Magic productions, and that will be one placement. We will then organise them placements internationally, and some of those have happened in New York and Iceland. Most of them happen in the UK because of the language and because it's more economical. But we've had people at the National, the Royal Court, the Traverse in Edinburgh. In fact, one of our most successful placements was very irritating for us because we put one of our production managers at the National and they liked him so much they gave him a job, which wasn't what we'd planned at all. We wanted him to come back and be brilliant in Ireland, and he assures me he will someday. But some of those relationships are really ongoing. And the mentoring that is part of the program is huge, and I'm still in touch with so many ex-seeds. And a lot of them ring me up, and you're always kind of looking at what they're doing elsewhere. And I mean, when Dara was on the program, he was on with Tom Creed, who has been a resident here a lot and is a hugely successful theatre and opera director, and Matt Torney, who is now the associate director at the Studio Theatre in Washington. So people move to very influential positions, and so yes, the international placements, and then we take them on trips, and we've brought them to Paris. In fact, we've brought them here to see work in Paris. We take them to Berlin, to Warsaw. Budapest was one of the early ones. So we really want to open their experience to other ways of making work, and people find that incredibly valuable, because although we have the Dublin Theatre Festival and a lot of work comes from abroad, it's never the same as seeing the work in its own context. So, when you go to a theatre in Warsaw or Berlin or Paris and you get a sense of the audience as well in those places, it's incredibly valuable for you as a theatre maker.
And to get a seeds showcase as well, which I find interesting, because what that does is, I mean, both Lynne and my company started off in the 80s in a recession, so they get to do a production and they have a very small budget, but they have to use their imagination and place that budget and create a production.
Yeah, I mean, we and Eleanor's company, Charabang, was one of the most influential in Ireland for many years, and one that really influenced me and inspired me. But we were all making work on absolute shoestrings. So, in a sense, we're offering an opportunity, but we're also saying you have to learn how to do it with very minimal resources. So we do give them a budget which is equivalent to a fringe show budget, and they can dream and make with that whatever they want. And some of the work has been extraordinary and very ambitious. It's all done for the very last time in their lives, with a lot of goodwill and their friends from college taking parts in plays, and that it's not quite the same as doing a fully fledged production where you have to pay everybody's tax and all of that. So they're still just about like in that the grey area between the fringe and professional practice, but it's one last time where they can think really big, and we've had some extraordinary shows made on that basis.
And then out of that, you wanted to, but it has proved more difficult to create a thing called Advance.
Yeah, I mean, Advance. Currently, Advance is really a parallel program. It was initially funded by the Arts Council, but it's not quite at the minute. It's not at the minute, because we had a big sort of drop in funding in the Irish theatre sector over the past few years with the economic crash. So some things just didn't survive it. But we still run the programme, and we help wherever we can. And this is a programme really for mid-career artists, because there are lots of schemes for young artists, and everybody's really keen to bring in youth and energy and emerging this, that and the other. And then suddenly those people themselves hit 30, and suddenly they realise that there isn't anything anymore. And this is an area where we really want to expand our support structures, because it's the mid-career artist that really suffers these days, we find. So while we want to keep continuing to support and encourage young people, the real need at the minute is for mid-career and people who are moving through their artistic trajectory, because we believe that support and education and encouragement and mentoring is useful at any time of your life. So that's really what Advance is about, and that's where we're going to put a lot of our energy over the next few years.
There's a lot on your website when you go on with the buzzword is regeneration. You've just mentioned there, downturns economically and so on. And the company's been going for 35 years. You do keep regenerating time after time. And you're a bit like the Doctor Who of Irish theatre, except you've always been a woman.
Very good way of putting it.
Yeah, you've always been a woman. But that does take a lot of stamina, emotional stamina. It takes energy of thought to pick yourself up every time you get a slight back slap. You keep going. It's extraordinary. It really is, Lynne.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is an achievement, actually, because so many of the companies, like, just to put this in context, when Rough Magic started in 1984, Charabang started in Belfast, Red Kettle in Waterford. Druid had already been going in Galway, so they had sort of preempted us, but there were companies like Wet Paint, which Owen Rowe and Michelle Forbes, who was here a few weeks ago, they were involved in. And the big one was the Passion Machine. And in a way, the Passion Machine and Rough Magic were kind of yin and yang, because we were looking outwards, and they were making work about where they were, which we ended up doing as well. So in a way, the two companies were very complementary. But the Passion Machine has been dormant for some time now, and it just became impossible for them to make the work at the scale they wanted. But I suppose, I don't know, maybe it's being Northern Irish. I just have a real sense of, like,
what a Protestant
I'm not
work
going
ethic.
to be told no. But it's no. It was just clear to me, and there were because I was doing a lot of work in the UK in the 90s, and then Siobhan Burke, who was our producer and an absolutely crucial figure in the company's history, she decided she wanted to go and make films. And she'd been with us for 14 years. And that was a moment at which I had to make a decision as to whether to fold the company or to carry on. And I just came to the conclusion that we hadn't even scratched the surface of what we could do. I felt that we had achieved a lot, but that there was an awful lot more still to do. And I also felt quite strongly, and still do, that there's a real role for a company with our breadth of the breadth of spectrum, I suppose, the breadth of work we do, and the kind of pluralism that we advocate, and the kind of imaginative oddity that we are, to really stand along with the established theatres. So a lot of people think Rough Magic is the establishment now, because we've been around for so long. But I think fundamentally we're anti-establishment, and quite keen to maintain a subversiveness, because I think that's what theatre actually is. That's the soul of it. It's about pulling the rug from under piety and pomposity, and always taking that slightly satirical look at things, which doesn't, to me, undermine its seriousness of purpose. So we feel that we need to keep on, however long we're around, we need to keep sort of flying the flag for that kind of subversiveness, in the sense that we are not quite in the establishment flow, I suppose, or territory, that we're just going to always be just floating outside. And, you know, that's a sort of like I suppose that's a sort of a philosophical position. But practically speaking, we also feel that we have to stick around, because there are so many people, and Seeds is proof of that, who would simply not have survived if we hadn't been there. So it's to stop those people disappearing. because the structures still aren't there within the establishment to keep people coming through.
When I hear you talk about that, about the kind of the subversion, the energy and the generosity of it, I mean, I could be listening to your Uncle Stuart, the late, great, much lamented playwright Stuart Parker is one of our, I sincerely wish he was around today, but he's been a huge influence on you, Lynn.
I'm just going to find that photograph. So you just keep
don't
talking.
worry about that. Stuart died in, remind me, Lynn?
1988.
1988. Lynn has done many productions of his work, and I've been lucky enough to be in some of them. Stuart Parker was a Belfast playwright, but very much an internationalist. A real man of the theatre in exactly the kind of way that Lynn talks about it, but with the idea of theatre being serious play, intellectual play, subversion. This is from Pentecost, which is his last play and an absolutely glorious play. That's me, several years and several kilos lighter than I am now. And this here wonderful woman is a lady called Carol Moore, and she and I founded the other company, Charabang, and this was a couple of months after we pulled the plug on our company. We were down working with Lynn doing Pentecost.
Pentecost is, it's a seminal play in itself. It's about the Ulster Workers' Council strike in 1974, which was one of the darkest hours of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And when it was produced at first, because it has an optimistic ending, it was seen as naive. And Stuart died well before the Good Friday Agreement, which we're all trying to preserve now. But I like to think that he was prescient, and he did offer a solution that was absolutely within the people. And the play, Eleanor plays a character called Marion, who has moved into this old house in Belfast city centre, but it is haunted by Carol's character, Lily Matthews, who is this very implacable and very substantial ghost who cannot be got rid of. And you see the battle between these two women, one to hold her ground and her territory, and the other to understand her, simply to understand her. And this is the journey of the piece. It's a brilliantly written play, and it's very funny, but it absolutely sort of encapsulates the whole Northern Irish dilemma. It was also a very significant play for us because, in a way, we had been a young company, and even Digging for Fire was a young people's play, but Pentecost was a mature work done by a mature company, and it was sort of our coming of age. And it also went to London and played at the Dunmar Warehouse, and then went to the Kennedy Centre in Washington, and was one of our great productions. And actually we have revived it since. And it's a play that I feel can be revived at any point because it has something to say, not just about Northern Ireland or Ireland, but about people. It's a great universal work. But it certainly was one of the most significant things we did.
And what have you been doing while you've been here? What's been the outcome of your residency?
Okay, well, as I've said to Nora, and I have fessed up, I came here to work on a very particular project, which was a piece of theatre that responded to the music of Francesco Cirisi, a member of Tarab who worked with us on Peer Gynt. And this was it's a suite, a jazz suite that he's written from fragments of Monteverdi. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece of music. And it was something that I found a huge kind of cathartic help when I was dealing with some difficult things myself. And I would love to make a piece where I have, and Eleanor has workshopped this idea a little bit with me back in Dublin, but I'd like to see maybe 4 to 6 characters all engaged in the process of working something out to this piece of music. And I've come to the conclusion that I can't do it without the people in the room. So the next stage is going to have to be an actual development process with the actors and a choreographer, because it will be to the music. So that's what I came to do. And what I've ended up doing is walking around Paris and getting so much inspiration from the city, from exhibitions, from pieces I've seen, But just what the value of this place is that it allows your brain to free itself and relax and just open up its channels so that things start to occur to you, which might have been stopped for some time. And I've been doing all sorts of things that amuse me. I've been making little sets and models of theatres and, picking up twigs from outside to make the landscape and all this, and drawing. So I have surprised myself by the things that I've ended up doing. And all of it is valuable and all of it is very creative. A lot of it will feed into the work that Rough Magic's going to do later this year. So although I haven't come to a conclusion with my piece about Francesco Cirisi, I know what the next step is, but I've also been able to reimagine an awful lot of approaches to other work that I've done. So I can't tell you how grateful I am to Nora and the CCI for letting me stay here and just be. And that's the main thing. You just are. And walking and walking and walking and walking, and I've completely worn out a pair of shoes in the process, but boy, has it been fantastic.
It's the second time I think I've visited you when you've been away from home and walked into your room and there's been models of sets around. When I came to Bucharest, when you were directing Dancing at Lunasa, you do like working in 3D. You have a great musical ear, but you also have a great visual eye as well.
Well, I did design sets when I was in college, and then for Rough Magic before we could afford to employ proper designers. But it's always been part of my imagination. So I do like mucking around with shapes, but thinking in 3 dimensions is what you do in the theatre. You've got to take the text from the flat page and make it into moving sculpture. And that's why I like to work in the round, for instance. It's my favourite form, and it's essential to work with the actors. You cannot think in the abstract about the shapes you're going to make. And my great hero Peter Brook said, he used to do the thing, and I did it as well. You make little diagrams of where you want everyone to stand, and you make in the margins of where the text is, and then the actors come on and they're doing something completely different, and he just chucked everything away. And I found that was the best thing to do. Watch how the living sculpture moves and see the possibilities, and then then you can start to make suggestions. But there's absolutely no point in telling anyone where to stand unless they need to be told. They need some help. But it's a sort of fluid sculpture is kind of what it is.
Yeah, I remember saying to you at one point what you thought was one of the more important things about directing, and you said time management. So time is, between the regeneration and whatever, time is a very important part of theatre. Timing, time, everything.
Well, yeah, and I mean, actually, there's so many aspects to this. I remember doing School for Scandal, and because of the style of the production, I had to get the actors to change the set, and the set was these huge kind of screens on casters. They all moved around, and the actors had to change them because having stage crew coming on would have really broken the flow. And so we did music, and I remember the production manager saying to me, well, a group of really experienced set changers wouldn't have been able to pick that up as quickly. And of course the actors not only had the motivation to get it right fast, they're also doing it to music, and so they were able to literally count the seconds to make the changes really specific, and so that they just glided in right at the point. So that kind of thing, the divisions of time are really crucial in making the piece. But knowing as well how to gauge a rehearsal so that a lot of people would say, oh, we're not getting through this scene, and we better stop because it's nearly lunchtime. And I've developed a kind of sense of where you can just let something flow, and that's true in technical rehearsals as well. It's much quicker just to let it keep going, and actually you'd be surprised, 9 times out of 10 you do actually get to the point you wanted. But yeah, in the bigger sense, I do think that my uncle wrote a wonderful play called Spoke Song, and the cyclical nature of work is crucial to his thinking. And I do think things happen in cycles. So sometimes things aren't great, and you're saying, this is just, I can't see the way through this, and you just have to wait for the upswing, and the upswing has an accompanying downswing. So, it series of cycles rather than a linear progression is what I think is more accurate to what we do.
So you go home tomorrow. What's next for Rough Magic?
The next thing I'm working on is a co-production with Glór in Ennis. That's in County Clare. And it's a piece that's written by Fergal McElherran for Simone Kirby and Penny Layden. It's about two sisters in a very peripheral community who are bringing up the child. The child is the product of a rape, and both the sisters are bringing up this child independently. Their own parents have left. And it sounds like a very dark story, and it is, but Fergal is a brilliantly witty writer, and his word for it is folkloric. There's a whole imaginative, almost magic realist end to it. So it's a two-hander, and we're going to do that opening in Glór in June. And then we will be going back to Kilkenny with Much Ado About Nothing, directed by Ronan Phelan, our associate director, with an ensemble of 9 this time. And then later in the year, I will be directing Marina Carr's Hecuba for the Dublin Theatre Festival. So that's a busy little year for us. And we're also we're helping some smaller companies and artists to produce work as well, because we can sort of offer them desk space and a bit of mentoring and so forth. So, so it's a very busy building, and we kind of like a very sort of like a high level of busyness, not insane, but just pretty busy. And that's the way this year is working out. So this is good.
You're extraordinarily easy to interview. All I did was press a button and she started talking. I haven't had to do anything at all. Does anybody have any questions as we talk about time and roll towards the end of this? Any questions for Miss Parker? Has she answered every damn thing you ever want to know? Yes, we have a brave soul here.
So I just say congratulations. It was a fantastic, I suppose, pair of shows that was put on for the summer. And good luck.
Thank you.
I want to ask a very specific question, if you don't mind. Can you talk a little bit about how you put together the ensemble, the choices you made? Because I found watching the 2 shows over the summer, what you already alluded to was how integrated and the level of trust and knowledge between the different actors. You could see it, how they had already gelled.
Absolutely.
I found it was really interesting in the Joyce piece. How did the selection of the actors fit with the different Stephens? Because I kind of came away from that piece going, you could have had so many different permutations of that story told based on the talents of the individual actors and the different Stephen roles.
Well, I'm really glad to actually talk a bit more about the ensemble, because that was it was the great achievement of last year that we had these 8 actors with us for 4.5 months, which is a really substantial amount of time, and we toured Ireland and what have you, starting in Kilkenny. So yes, Ronan and I auditioned together, and we sort of didn't know what we were looking for. We were looking for people of variety, I mean, we wanted, because we knew we were casting people to double through many parts and cross-gendering and what have you. So there was no point in casting a specific actor for a specific part. We needed to cast a team, and so we wanted diversity within that team. So and obviously talent, and also the ability to get on well, because they're going to be together for a long time and they've got to get on. So I suppose that was really the kind of the criteria by which we chose, and not that specific actually. But I have to say, I mean, the bunch we had were just a joy. And it wasn't easy, because everyone came from very different backgrounds and the work processes were all very different. So we had a 5-week rehearsal period for Midsummer Night's Dream, and we used every minute of that, because not only were we finding out about the play, but also the company itself. With Ronan's casting, and he was he agonized over it for so long. And as you say, it could have gone so many ways. And there were different cast lists drawn up that I saw that the actors never saw because it changed so many times. But I think he got a really, really good result. And I loved that the Karen and Martha were sort of the beginning and end Stephen. And then, of course, everybody gets to play the narrator as well. Yeah, so, I mean, it was a real test for them because they had to be very flexible and very very easy to the touch. And you know, I won't say there weren't some sort of black moments where people just thought they weren't going to get something or, you know, whatever, but they actually all pulled together, and they're really good friends, and they're all in a WhatsApp group and they talk to each other incessantly. And it's lovely, actually. What we hope is that that group of very talented people will end up someday producing work of their own, and that there could be cross-fertilization there.
Anyone else? Well, I have to say, as an actor, it's fabulous to work in an ensemble because you very rarely get the chance. I mean, we are freelance, we bounce from job to job, but when you do get a chance to work with people whom you know, the work it deepens and becomes very rich. It's a great thing to have established, definitely, yeah. And the Irish Times Theatre Awards are on Sunday, and that ensemble is up for Best Ensemble, and I sincerely hope
we don't know.
you come away with it. That would be great.
That would be nice.
Yeah, it would be richly deserved.
Yeah.
So everything you've ever wanted to know has been satisfied. Well, it just remains to thank Nora for accommodating us tonight. And Lynne, it's been an absolute pleasure, and you really are incredibly easy. Is there anything you want that hasn't been covered you'd like to finish with?
I don't think so. I mean, absolutely not. I found myself last Saturday in Gare Saint-Lazar's beautiful little theatre way downriver on the banks of the Seine. And they show you a work in progress, and then they give you dinner and lots of wine. And then they make you sing. Everybody has to sing. So I was singing then, and I'd rather not do it this evening if nobody minded. But just to say that Eleanor, it's really wonderful to get Eleanor over here. And thank you very much for being a brilliant interviewer and very, very flattering in many ways. But Eleanor's one of the great actors in Ireland who totally understands the value of ensemble, because that is her background. And Charabang was, I think it's the most important theatre company ever to come out of the north, because when Charabang started in the 80s, it was a real reaction, and this is way before Waking the Feminists was ever heard of. This was a reaction to the absolute dearth of work and stories for women, not just in the north, but elsewhere, but in Belfast in particular. It was stunning to see this calibre of work made for and by women, telling women's stories. But I wasn't even conscious of them as a feminist doing women's work. I just thought they were brilliant because they were, and that was the thing. The quality of the work was extraordinary. So you know, it was wonderful to see Eleanor on the stage on the Waking the Feminist Day in the Abbey, reminding us that there had always been this strand of work in Ireland, and if it had gone dormant, it was absolutely time it woke up. So you know, it was like massive to have that reminder and that wake up call from both then and now. So hopefully all the ensembles will have a little bit more gender balance, a little more coherence going forward.
You're very kind, Lynne. Thank you very much indeed.
How will I?
Thanks very, very much for coming, and I hope you found that as interesting as I did. And I think there may be a glass of wine outside. Nora, am I right? There will be. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you
Thanks,
for coming.
Lynne.